Um, so no referrals tonight. And I think the main thing we wanted to talk about was TDR and the ag overlay. So I'm glad Doug could join us tonight. So unless anybody else has anything to say otherwise, I'd like to just get to that and start that discussion.
I second that. Let's go for it.
Just Doug, I'll give you a little background of what we're thinking or why we wanted to have you on tonight. With discussion of the ag overlay district, we weren't making a lot of headway with that. And I think some of it comes back to, we want to do something to try to protect some development creep on farmland, but I also can't really see taking away property owners' rights either. There's kind of got to be a balance. And the TDR program kept coming up as possibly a way to direct some development to more desirable areas or some poorer land. So we wanted to continue to learn a little bit more about that and what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, happy to chat about it and stuff. Absolutely. So I guess let me ask a question. I know originally the thought process when I met with you before, there was concern about what I would call creep of development into agricultural areas. And I think that's kind of the basis of where we started with for the concept of the conversation relative to the agriculture protection overlay to mirror the strategic farmland protection area. Is that still, let me just start with basic, is that still kind of the concern of the committee? Is that creep into those agriculture areas that we've?
I think it is, yes. And
yeah, but I think we also want to be, it is, but we want to be careful about one, not, taking away rights of landowners, but also protecting land that may not be the best land or that's not even being farmed, just for the sake of protecting farmland. I think we want to protect the best land and good viable land that's actually really being farmed. So and the more creep you have, it puts pressure on any viable farmland around the area.
So let me ask a question then. So you know how we have the strategic farmland protection area is a broad area, and like you said, some of that area does not necessarily include prime soils, for instance. Is the desire to only look at those parcels with prime soils, or is the desire to kind of do away with the strategic farmland protection area and instead look at parcel by parcel specific?
What's manageable?
Great question. We have to talk that out. I don't know what's manageable.
Yeah, because you just opened it up way up by saying that. If we looked at parcel by parcel, it would take an extremely long time perhaps to go ahead and do that. But if you take a look at, what's already been protected and with Paddleford Brook and places like that, here we are, we've talked about opening up 21, the southern part of the town of Canandaigua, and how development is going to rush down there if we continue to allow that. That's an area that I'm particularly interested in. I take Bob's point that we don't want to infringe property, owners from being able to go ahead and do what they want, but overall the community has to take a look at this and determine what the community really wants. And I think that the community has spoken that they do want to preserve agriculture in our area. But that and I'll stop right now. I think we all understand what the big white elephant is in the room at this point, and how it crossed over 5 and 20, and is right up against 21 right now.
So let me share my screen here. Just I don't want to bounce you off here, but I want to share with you while we're talking about some of this stuff. So I don't know, I'm very visual. I'd rather look at it as we talk about it. So this is obviously the strategic farmland protection area, everything in the red. Everybody can see that, right?
Yep.
Okay. So like you were just saying, the areas in the white is designated as not prime farmland, and you see that there are parcels, quite a few parcels that are shown in white that are in the strategic farmland protection area that are not necessarily prime farmland. And then, Tim, to your point, here's 5 and 20 crossing right across this darker line right here. And there's certainly prime soils classified in green that are south of 5 and 20. Certainly some north also. And then you've got the soils of statewide significance, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have the development, and you were talking about 21. So the red line kind of follows State Route 21 over here on the west side of the city of Canandaigua. And specifically, you have the new Morel subdivision right where my arrow is right here, right? And then you've got prime farmland right adjacent to it, essentially, on the other side of the street. So I guess my question is, and I get what you're saying about the protection or not wanting to take away landowner rights. I totally understand that. Let's put a pin in that for a second, come back to that in a second. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, has there been a kind of a philosophical change from when we originally did the agriculture plan relative to the protection of some of these parcels, where originally we designed it more as a broad area and said this area generally is an area that should be identified as a strategic farmland protection area? Or should we maybe redefine that as those parcels that are designated as prime farmland and inside the strategic farmland protection area? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I would go ahead and point out that the Morel property is right in the middle of a culture that's agriculture, and it's going to conflict with all of the things that are ag on the other side of 5 and 20, and there is an awful lot of land that we see north of the city that is not of prime value to ag, and it's not being farmed. But historic farm community areas are being impacted. I think Bob would probably agree with me on that, right, Bob?
Yeah, to your question there, Doug, I mean, the strategic farmland protection area is a pretty big area, and as we've talked about before, it doesn't really actually do anything.
Right.
It's aligned. So if there's I wouldn't be against changing it if there was a more effective strategy, because just having the line drawn around there doesn't really do anything. But how we go about parcel by parcel, I don't really know.
Well, the good news is a lot of that's been mapped, right? The parcels. So we actually know, for instance, through the agriculture enhancement plan that was done in 2016, and maybe some modifications need to be done to it, but we did the mapping associated parcel by parcel. So we essentially, it's this map. If we were to blow this up and look at this would actually give us essentially the parcel property lines, and we could see parcel by parcel, whether or not the parcel has been generally classified as prime farmland based on the soil characteristics at the time the ag plan was done. I would make an assumption here that generally speaking, the soil characteristics aren't going to change that much.
No,
right. They're generally going to stay the same, more or less.
Yeah.
But again, exactly what you guys are saying, there are some parcels, and use the Morel property again as an example. Now we know that's now going to be growing houses, right? Or at least part of it. But it is designated as prime farmland, but it's outside the strategic farmland protection area, so you can make arguments kind of both ways. And I get what you're saying in terms of trying to protect the landowner's rights. I guess what I'm trying to get to is, if we're going to try to really focus on protection of these prime parcels, instead of just saying prime parcels townwide, do you really want to further define it as prime parcels in the strategic farmland protection area that have the highest value, and then maybe we look at other alternatives for trying to protect those? I guess is the kind of question I'm getting at.
Yeah, and maybe some definition of size, like the larger parcels would be more at risk and would allow much more creep, I would say, than smaller parcels.
Well, so let me give you an example of that, and let me give you an example of the opposite of that. So we certainly have parcels where developer can come in, they can purchase large swaths of land that over time, over 10, 15 years, I mean, Lakewood Meadows is a good example of that, right? That didn't happen overnight. That was over many different years and everything. But I've also just recently had conversations, and Sarah and I were talking about this relative to the PDR program and the National Conservation Program, where the new PDR program from the state of New York really is trying to, in some aspects, it almost lends itself to protection of larger parcels versus the smaller parcels. But then the concern there is, right, it's a lot easier for a developer to come and buy 35 acres and drop 10 houses on that than it is for them to come and buy 300 acres. And then the infrastructure and everything. So it's almost like it has to be a two-pronged approach to protect those larger farming operations where farming, and I've heard you guys say it time after time over the years, where the farming operation is in close proximity to one another, where it lends itself to continue efficient operations of the farming. And in addition, look at the smaller parcels that may actually in some cases be more at risk for development. It's easier for a smaller developer to come in and buy that smaller parcel and put up 8 houses than going and buying a, like I said, 200 or 300 acre parcel. So it's almost like I feel like, and I know, and Sarah, I think you probably have the camera off, but I know you're listening. I know one of the things that we're looking at for 2022 is the conservation programs. That's one of our 5 or 5 goals for 2022 is really trying to continue the protection of those parcels with the highest natural resources. Agriculture is certainly an aspect of that. Also forestry management is certainly part of that. And really looking at, okay, what are the different avenues? What are the different ways where we can effectuate and really trying to support the farming operations of those communities, but also provide for that slowdown of that creep. But with all that, right, the problem is, let's hypothetically say this landowner right here, right in the middle of the strategic farmland protection area, what happens if they decide, you know what, we're done farming, we don't have kids, we're ready to cash out and sell it to a developer? Right? That's the ongoing battle back and forth. That's not an easy, I don't know of that's going to take some education. That's going to take also, I think, an investment on the part of the town of Canandaigua and having programs that would be lucrative to that landowner to maybe consider the extinguishment of those development rights to enable that parcel to continue farming, because otherwise, it will be lost for housing eventually.
Yep.
In a situation like that, the TDR doesn't fit into something like that. That's only if there's a developer involved, correct?
Well, so I pulled up from the TDR report, right? The big thing about the TDR is the transfer of development rights from sending to receiving areas, right? And it's a fascinating concept that has been used in some places. And when we were originally talking about our TDR, we were talking about an area like the Paddleford Brook Greenway, as the sending area where we would say, or I'm sorry, yes, the sending area where we would send the development rights away from that area and receive them in, for instance, the MU01 was a lot of that whole conversation when we were talking about the TDR program. Since that time, the MU01 has evolved and Uptown has evolved, and we did a feasibility study. We initiated form-based code to really, continue the journey on of building Uptown into the planning documents that had been envisioned by the community and making that happen. So truthfully, it's almost, there's no incentive to do TDR with Uptown now, because what would the developer get out of it, right? So it's almost got to be something else. It's almost got to be, okay, maybe the receiving area is another area. Maybe it's our gateway area, which is this area up here, the MU02, or maybe it's the MU03. And that was always something that we had talked about. It's actually identified here on this map. And maybe the sending areas are maybe even a little bit more loosely defined, whether it's those parcels with prime soils in the strategic farmland protection area, giving the ability to send those development rights away from that parcel and then receive those development rights in the MU03, for instance, or the land bank. I keep coming back to, and I keep bringing up the land bank over and over again, because if a developer wants to develop a parcel, right, more than likely it has the infrastructure, it's got sewer, it's got water, the ability to do that. Otherwise, they're probably not overly interested in it at an economical standpoint. Otherwise, it's going to self-limit. So when you look at a lot of the strategic farmland protection area, without public water and sewer, it's almost self-limiting. It's yes, it has been done by Lakewood Meadows, but there was an opportunity for them to tie in both for Middle Cheshire Road as well as County Road 16 and run over that way, right? Whereas some of this area down in here, the terrain is going to make it difficult to provide water, sewer. It's almost self-limiting in those aspects. But you get to this area, and this is the area that I think I would probably be some of the most concerned with, is this area 5 and 20 corridor that has all these green identified parcels, right? Those are prime soils. Soils are the best in the town of Canandaigua. And, maybe that's an area where we concentrate in trying to help continue to make sure that that is agriculture use primarily.
You see the green line for Paddleford Brook? I mean, if you just took that and extended it right down to the hill coming up off of 5 and 20 as it continues down 21. I mean, there you have it right there. If that was the area, that would definitely preserve farmland and ag culture in an area that is under a lot of pressure right now for development, especially when you see what happened with the Morel development. That to me is just the precursor of what's going to come if we don't do something like this. I think the ideas are all good ideas, Doug. We just have to make the line that we see for the strategic protection area for ag and natural resources really mean something. And how do we do that? By extinguishing the development rights for those areas. Did Morel development, that area, did that have sewer and water right there?
So what it actually has is the parcel itself did not have sewer. It did have water, but the sewer was close enough. It was easy enough for them to tie into.
Yeah, so that's Tetris. That's development Tetris right there, and they'll continue to do that.
Oh, of course, absolutely, 100% is going to travel.
So Doug, I agree that that area is definitely the most at risk, probably, because farther down where you said is self-limiting, there's much less prime land down there anyway.
Right.
So what you mentioned is, some types of ways to incentivize landowners if they get to that point. Well, we want to sell it, but we don't know what to do. Do you have any ideas or examples from other
Yeah, yeah.
other
So
municipalities, other than, there's PDR, but what other types of ways could you incentivize people that they could get some extra value from their land, but still keep it in agriculture?
so I understand the question. Let me ask you a question. I'm sorry to answer a question with a question, but I'm just trying to understand. When we talk about the ag overlay, one of the concerns I kept hearing was telling people private property owner rights, right? Okay, let me ask you guys this. In this area, just generally speaking, that I drew this red circle around, do you believe that there is enough value for the future of the Canandaigua community to preserve agriculture in this area, that should maybe factor in or more heavily influence those private property owner rights to try to keep this agriculture?
So
Instead of looking at the whole town, just this area. Let me ask
yeah,
that.
I would say, how does that compare to the Paddleford Brook area? Since that's already been established.
Right. So the Paddleford Brook, right? So this area up in here, you see there's a lot of soils that are prime if drained, right? But here's the thing. We originally established the Paddleford Brook Greenway before we had the strategic farmland protection area. That was kind of like our first go at all of this. And one of the reasons for establishing the Paddleford Brook Greenway was because we knew that there were some of the larger farm operations in this area and trying to keep those contiguous parcels, or at least close. Plus, we also know that the landowners were investing in the drain tiles. And so they were putting in the infrastructure to make that more suitable to that category prime if drained, right? So that they're working on the drainage piece. So then the soils become more drained and they're larger parcels. They're more contiguous to some of the larger operations of the town. So that's why we originally created the Paddleford Brook Greenway. So it's not that it's really any different. It's just in this area in the red circle that I just drew, those are more natural prime soils. Those are some of the most prime soils in the town of Canandaigua.
Okay, thank you.
I think that somewhat answers your question right there, that it's probably worth really trying to protect that.
Right. So then when you talk about, to answer your question, Bob, if we were to say, okay, in this area, no additional subdivision. So we're just talking about options, right? We could say, okay, maybe the policies or the regulations are going to be more restrictive in this area. Maybe that does start to step on some toes relative to private property owner rights. But maybe that conversation, a political decision, has to be made whether or not that is worth doing that, because these soils are so unique in the town of Canandaigua, and these are some of the best soils in the town of Canandaigua to preserve the agricultural operations there, right? So that's something we have to put on the table. Then we talk about putting on the table other options. We talk about, we could look at some sort of modified TDR, where it's like, okay, if a developer is going to build in that development, they've got to put so much money into the open space in that red circle. They've got to put so much money into the open space fund to offset or try to protect other areas to keep from the overdevelopment, since those are prime soils. We could look at something like that. That may be more advantageous to the private landowner. Or again, a zoning, maybe it's a special district, a special designated area, and then we talk about maybe a town program, that there are financial benefits to the landowners in that specific area to continue the agricultural purpose. Again, with the premise being that these are some of the best soils in the town of Canandaigua. We don't want to lose these, right?
Yeah. So where's Gary Davis tonight? Talking about politics. I mean, shoot,
Well, we are recording this, so we'll make sure all the town board members get this, and they can certainly go back and revisit the conversation here. I think in this particular area, and I've always kind of kept coming back to this area that generally is in this red line. While the Paddleford Brook Greenway and the Strategic Farmland Protection Area, they have the intent, and Ag and Markets has worked very closely with us and recognized our intent that we're trying to protect those areas, generally speaking, and we've been very successful with the PDR program, specifically in the Paddleford Brook Greenway. This specific area, if we're going to kind of just try to focus on a specific area, this area seems like to me it has the most prime soils of the town of Canandaigua with the least amount of protection and the greatest threat because there is water and sewer in some of this area.
That's really summarizing it up right in a nutshell, for
Yeah,
sure.
that makes a pretty strong argument.
How many farmers are in this area? How many farms are there? Right here in the red circle.
Well, remember, the map is active farmland, so if it's green, it is, like, they didn't Labella didn't do the soil rating for inactive, from what I remember. So if it's green, it's an active farm that has good soil.
Well, I
And it's
couldn't
like,
imagine that,
it's
good
paying
soils
more for
just ends
people.
at that line right there. But the point I was trying to make, Sarah, is that I think that there might be 2 or 3 farms total in this whole area, farm owners.
I don't know.
Probably 3 to 4, I would say, in that area.
Yeah, that's not very many.
We're doing the majority of the farming.
Yeah.
So Bob, you're talking about like 2 to 3 operators on all of these parcels. Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
Okay.
I would think. For the
Don't
most part.
don't forget they count like someone who has horses as active farmland.
I'm saying there's plenty more than that, but I would say that there's probably 3 to 4 that do the majority of the farming,
Right.
larger percentage.
What about chickens, Sarah?
I don't know if I guess they count that, but we don't have any large enough to really fall under that.
I'm just teasing.
So what does it take to redraw a line like the strategic farmland protection area, or to draw an additional line around this?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but I
I
don't think the blind's not going to make any difference. This has to be, really,
Yeah, I understand that, but to identify the area to then, 'cause I would say, Doug, we probably have to officially identify the area before we can do anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, this is an adopted plan by the town board, right? So any modifications can be done by the town board. We could certainly redraw the strategic farmland protection area, the Paddleford Greenway, or even amend the plan or do an addendum, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if our intent really is to try to focus on those areas that we believe are the best soils that probably have some of the greatest development pressure, it might behoove us to identify a specific area like this, or even just taking a map like this and saying, hey, yo, town board, we feel like this area needs some attention. Even as a starting point, we could even literally just take this map that I literally just drew while we're talking here, and we could say, are you receptive to us advancing a proposal to help protect this specific area? And just to get some feedback, right?
That's the only way to do it, is to take away the development rights, or to capture the development rights is probably a better way to state that, through, a PDR program, whether it's funded by the state or by the town.
Can I just point something out about the line before we get too far away from it? I'm assuming that, we are still open to pursuing the PDR program with the state if we have eligible applicants and eligible properties. And one of the main points in those applications is still, does it fall inside a protection area designated by the town or county, et cetera? I'd hate to tighten that line and then find out that we had some viable, a high prime content farmland outside of it that would have been eligible had we not moved the line. So I just would hate to make it just one area. Maybe within our existing area, we have different focus points for different reasons, but just a thought.
Yes, Sarah, I guess what I'm sensing from this conversation is that the other lines of the Paddleford Brook and the strategic wouldn't change. It's just there would be increased focus on this specific area, whether it's additional regulations or financial incentives or otherwise.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood it, and I didn't want to lose that point.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had some trouble with my audio for a little while, so I couldn't comment, but there was a in these applications, that we look at, whether it be the state program or the national program, they do always want to know what the percentages of prime soils plus those soils that are statewide or local importance. So, as we talk about, well, how are we going to figure out which parcels we want to protect the most? Beyond what you guys are talking about, we can also come up with a list of criteria, do you have this percentage of soils? Do you have, sometimes they even look at production, what's the percentage of land that's in active production on this particular parcel? Is it 70% or more? Is it 60% or more? So we can use those programs as a basis to try and come up with some ways for us to narrow down or increase the list, whichever it may be, of parcels we might want to consider. In addition to what you guys are talking about,
Yeah. One of the things, and I know we've talked about this in the past, that the town has been trying to be very, very careful with the running of new water and sewer lines to avoid the strategic farmland protection areas. And you may have heard us over the last 60 days. We've had just so many conversations relative to the replacement of a water tank right up in this area here, where my little circle is, right up here. And originally it had all kinds of plans to run way over to the west side and up through and everything. But we've really been focused for the last couple of years on making sure that that line, because we know it has to go to the north, takes the direct, most shortest route possible, getting it up here and out of our farmland protection area as fast as possible. But the existing tank just happens to be, right here where I just put this dot. So we continue to do things like that, which I think makes for good planning. And all of this does factor in. But, one of the things that we go back to is we were talking about this Morel subdivision earlier. Well, the Morels bought that property, from everything I can see, in the early 2000s. They've had that property for like 15 years with the plan to develop it, way before the town had the strategic farmland protection area, the Paddleford Brook Greenway, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do anything. We get better in time the more we refine and the more we look at these items, and the more we're massaging it and looking at it and making it work better. Would the Morel development have been able to go forward today? I don't know. Maybe not. Probably with the town board's new enactment of a scenic viewshed overlay, which requires 1 acre minimum lots, it may not have been able to go forward. But, as we look at these restrictions, and it's, like I said, it's almost got to be like a multi-pronged approach, where if our intent really is to try to focus on protection of this farmland in this red circle, it's probably got to be through regulations as well as financial both. It can't be one or the other. It's got to be a combination of the two. And then we can look at the TDR, because then we can introduce the TBR. We can say, okay, here's a specific area that we have a specific desire and we feel like there's a need to protect this. And we designate this as a sending area. And then we designate an area like maybe the MU03, maybe the MU02. I don't know. We'll have to work on that. But there has to be the receiving side also, where those development rights could be received. Or we could just say, okay, on the financial piece, restrictions are in place, and this area is an area that we designate as TDR program as a sending area, and the receiving area is the TDR bank to receive the money to continue to promote and protection and extinguish development rights.
Yeah, so if we did it that way, this air, could that be then used, the money that puts in the bank, for open space protection that the town board chooses?
Yes, or, and again, that would be a decision of the town board.
It wouldn't have to be decided at the time that the developer puts the money in the bank?
No, it wouldn't have to be decided at the time the developer puts the money in the bank. But take this a step farther. If this is our focus, maybe what we say from a financial side of things is, okay, if you're going to develop in this area, you can do it. However, it's got to meet these zoning regulations, these policy things. Plus, there has to be a financial contribution to the land bank that also then has to be used to extinguish development rights in the same area. So the
Yeah, I
sending and
was just gonna
receiving area
ask that.
overlap each other through
Can
the
they
use
be-
of the land bank.
Yeah, can they be the same area?
Yeah, essentially, yes. Because you've identified the area that you're trying to protect as much land as possible for a specific purpose. In this particular instance, it's agriculture use. And again, it would be up to the town board, but if the town board agreed with that and they voted to do that, then we could accept the money into the land bank. We could then work with the landowners in this same designated area to potentially extinguish more development rights. The challenge will be, though, I will tell you, if we really do this correctly and have both the regulations and the financial, and we don't run more water and sewer in this area, I don't know that you're going to really have a whole lot of money in the land bank to be able to extinguish, because most developers will probably say, it's not worth it. But wait, isn't that what we want?
Right.
Yeah. So I
Well,
think we
that
got,
would have been the best of both worlds 15 years ago when the property was bought over on 5 and 20. Not to go ahead and put this on our watch. That was done a long time ago, but
Right.
That's all.
so I think we've got some good ideas in a good direction. Doug, what would you say the next step is if we actually want to move this forward of drawing a circle in that area and bringing it to the town board, or what steps do we need to take?
I think maybe a more, maybe instead of spending a lot more time with rehashing the lines, just introducing this concept, maybe even to our ordinance committee, and just get an initial feedback, concept level conversation, right? 30,000 foot. Hey, this is what we're thinking. What do you guys think? If they say, no way, Jose, we'd never support that, then we go back to the drawing board. If they say, continue to work on it, refine your proposal and bring it to us, then we know we're on a path that they would at least consider.
Well, they didn't seem real favorable to the overlay the first time we talked about it.
Right.
It seemed like this isn't a whole lot different.
It's not a whole lot different, but it is more narrowly focused. That may make a difference. And then the compelling argument being specifically this area of the town with the most prime soils. And that's why I ask at the beginning of this, if you guys really agree that this is some of the best soils in the town of Canandaigua, with some of development pressure being the water, sewer, it's almost like the stuff in the Paddleford Brook Greenway, we have identified that. We're working through the PDR program. We're trying our best to keep the creep coming in from Farmington, but eventually that will creep into that. This is probably still 10 years away, right? And so if we can get ahead of that now to put some stuff in place in 2035, they might be thanking us for helping to protect this area, or they may think we were nuts. I don't know. Time will tell, right?
Who has that crystal ball? I don't think anybody does, Doug. But, I mean, if this is what we're going to do, if we want to protect ag, this is where some major producers are for ag. Not only would we be protecting prime agricultural soils, but we would also be protecting a culture, a way of life, and all of the revenue that's generated from the products that are made in these areas right here is going to continue to be made. And I got to say, they're not making land around here anymore. So 10 years down the road, I think it's worth a try.
So maybe just simple as contacting the ordinance committee and attending a meeting, present this to them about what do you think we could do? What are your ideas? Not any specific, because we don't have a specific plan other than wanting to do something.
Right. Well, I think it's fair to say, to explain the rationale as to why you feel like this area might be needed. And then I think it's also fair to say, looking at it from both a regulatory aspect as well as a financial aspect, being the TDR program, right? So that there is some benefit. That the thing that you also have to keep in mind when we go back to that question of private property rights, again, if the person that owns the parcel, and I don't even know who it is, and I don't want to know, but I'm just going to put a little, well, I hold the circle here. If that person wants to sell their land for a housing development, do you want to have the regulations to the point that it makes it nearly impossible for them? Or do you just accept, okay, we did this, we tried our best, but at the end of the day, the private property owner has the right to choose whether or not they want to protect it or turn it into a housing development. The challenge being with that, right, is 100 years from now, if everybody decides they're going to cash out their land, there's not going to be any farming left.
There's going to be no food.
Right.
Bob, that's your land where Doug's dot is.
Maybe it was, I don't know.
It was right on corner of Hickox and 5 and 20.
Yeah. I just grabbed one there, but anyway, yeah. So, I mean, and Bob, I certainly can work with you and we can work up something and we can get a date with the ordinance committee and ask for some initial feedback if this is kind of the direction you guys want to go. I think maybe, and Bob came to the ordinance committee meeting. We talked about the ag overlay. I almost think it may have been too much. It was because it affected such a large portion of the town. We might be better off with a more simplified area. But the big piece of this is still providing for the private property owner rights. I think that is one of the things I heard loud and clear, that they want to make sure those rights are protected.
Yeah.
And is going back to what we talked about just a minute ago, when you had the example of, do you want to totally stop them or almost have an option of some type of economic incentive that would get them to keep it in agriculture, but they still could have another choice. I think that would be more, people would be more receptive to that, I think.
Right.
Someone that's, I'm retiring, I want to sell the land, but hey, there is an option of, it could still be farmland, but I could get some extra value out of it instead of putting houses on it.
Right. But one of the things that I feel like we have to be prepared to answer with all of this, and I've heard it time and time again from one of the members of the ordinance committee and somebody who's been involved and I have a lot of respect for, but he always says the same thing. Why should we be subsidizing the farms as opposed to any other industry that's in the town of Canandaigua? And, I think that is a fundamental question, that there is that back and forth. There's that challenge. There are those individuals in our community that they're not too worried about.
Yeah, well, there's only a couple of farmers in this area. That's it, just a couple. We have no political, strength compared to thousands of people that, he may represent. It's a counterculture to ag. I mean, I guess, he's got a point.
But you as the ag committee and this conversation, that's where I was trying to prompt you guys to think about, again, even though it may be counter to what even the majority of the population, and I don't think it is, but let's hypothetically say it's counter to what the majority of the residents of the town of Canandaigua feel, that, let's hypothetically say the majority of the residents feel like we shouldn't worry about subsidizing agriculture. If it's gone, it's gone. Tim, to your point, you're going to run out of food. Do you want to make sure, 100 years from now, that there is still agriculture in the town of Canandaigua? This is a type of avenue to ensure that. If you're not worried about that 100 years from now, then you let the free market decide, right?
Yeah, well, that's kind of interesting. When you take a look at global warming and desertification that's going on, and where farms are, water wars that are going on out west, control over the Colorado River, all that stuff. This makes this land even more valuable than it might be today. 10 years from now, this land might be a lot more valuable for agriculture than what we're doing today. Agricultural practices aren't going to continue to stay the same, there are going to be developments that are going to have to, generate more food on each acre. And so, the yields are going to go up. There's going to be all kinds of, things that we can't see that's going to make this land even more valuable to feed our population. So, that's the bigger picture. That's like, from 80,000 feet,
Right.
outer space.
Right. Exactly.
Doug,
Global.
and to what you said about, the person who says, why should we subsidize agriculture? And I don't mean to dilute the conversation and take it away from agriculture at all, but from an administrative perspective, I think of this program and I think, well, what if, this is the Ag Committee's suggestion for how to use this program, but what if it's part of a larger program that could also be used to protect, buffer areas around streams with willing landowners or forested land? We were talking about some of those other programs the state has. What if it's all part of a larger natural resource protection program that has financial incentives for agriculture and beyond?
Mhm.
That might be harder to do and more complicated, but easier to swallow because it does more than just farmland.
Oh, that's a really good point, Sarah. It won't be just why should we be subsidizing farmers? We're, taking care of the community's needs overall across all of the natural resources.
Because loss of farmland is part of a bigger problem of loss of undeveloped land, in general, be it forest land or land along, riparian zones and stuff like that too. Grasslands, although we don't really have those,
But is that too broad of a stroke?
I don't think so personally, but I don't know. We haven't tried to do it yet.
Well, I think that the pressure is here today, and we've got to do something that's manageable. If you think that's manageable to be able to do that, to get results more manageable than just doing agriculture, maybe we should look into that as well.
I was thinking about, how do you identify it? If you don't have people jumping forward to say me, what would you do to know which parcels? And I was thinking about it, and all of these grant programs that we see from the state and federal agencies, they tend to have a list of criteria or a set of rules that they use to determine if the parcel is worthy or not. And I think I was saying a little bit of that earlier. There's a new program out from the state that will help municipalities protect forest parcels with 75% forested land or greater. So there's just an example of fairly simple ways you could have a list of worthy land that also happens to fall within our predetermined strategic farmland protection area or our strategic forest protection area. Do they meet any of these criteria? Okay, fine. Do you want to develop it? All right. Well, if the land you want to develop meets or has any of these criteria items, then you need to pay into the bank, and the money should be used to protect other land elsewhere with a willing landowner that also meets those criteria. Something kind of like that, like you were saying earlier with Doug about how, it has to be, if they're going to develop in this target area, then we should protect something in the target area also.
Yeah, so we did, when Bob came to the ordinance committee, we did talk a little bit about that, and we actually did bring up the strategic forest protection area and this whole financial aspect. But I think one of the pushbacks that we got relative to that was this concept of private property owner rights. And I don't know if it was because it was too much of the town, it was too broad of an area. That's why I wonder if a more succinct area like the area in red, we might have a better argument because this is unique, such prime soils, that maybe we have a targeted approach. In addition to the other things, the forest and the farmland and the Paddleford Brook Greenway, that we have this area specifically that we're going to have additional focus on. But that we did have that whole conversation in relative even paying into the land bank, and it was not well received.
Yeah, just because of the large area, or because Well, yeah, no, that one was like 7 acres or above, wasn't it?
It was 7 acres or above. I think it was because essentially when you zoom out here and you're looking at this entire map of the town, and then you overlay also the strategic farmland protection area, there's not much of the town left where we wouldn't be implementing some sort of fee or policy.
Yeah,
I think at that particular meeting too, there was one person that stirred things up quite a bit from the beginning, and that kind of went not so great after that.
Yeah.
If you take a look at the circle and compare it to some of the, comments I made that the southern corridor is now opened up, I think that the keyhole would be closed up by the red circle.
Mm-hmm.
So, to your point, where there is water and sewer, that's where the development is going to go. If you
True.
cut this off and there's no development of water and sewer in the red circle, well, it can't continue down without a huge investment in infrastructure, on its own.
And maybe this is a phased approach. One way to go about this, maybe what we do is we say, okay, town board, we would like you to adopt a policy that says you will not expand any water or sewer lines in the red circle. Now, if a property owner comes and they want it, they can certainly petition the town board to form a district, but that the town would not initiate action to expand water or sewer in the red circle. Maybe that's a baby step, but maybe that's something that we could at least get people to rally around, because that has really limited to do with the property owner's rights, right? We're not telling the property owner they can't do anything. And then maybe the next phase, we look at the regulatory, or maybe we have to do financial as the next phase, and then the regulatory. Those almost are going to have to go hand in hand, because there has to be a regulation saying you can't do something in order to get the financial benefit to be able to give back to somebody to, offer their value or offer their development rights, unless it's through an additional conservation program, like a grant program, where that money is coming in from an outside entity.
Well, I think that my house on Woolhouse Road is the only one that doesn't have any fresh water right now.
Yeah.
It's because there's no population density
Right.
down this road, because it's all ag land.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the way it is. So I remember that when I first moved in here 16 years ago, I ran a petition to see if it was possible to bring water down. And I know there was a study done. The monthly cost to fund the bond for me, it was like $500 a month just to have fresh water brought in.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty strong deterrent, for sure. So,
and we're dealing with the same exact thing right now with the Hamlet of Cheshire with sewer, right? There's been a lot of requests for sewer in the Hamlet of Cheshire, but it's the financial piece that makes it unaffordable to this point. And we're going to have another meeting with the residents coming up here soon to see if they want us to do it or not. But, obviously that's this area right down in here, and exploring the possibility of running sewer down in this area if the residents want it. But then, does that then initiate additional development, right? Once the sewer's there, and then the developer can tap in or not. There are some things called lateral restrictions, and that is something I think that and maybe even put that on the topic of a future ag committee meeting to really educate everybody on lateral restrictions. In the future, when you're reviewing applications for subdivisions and those types of things, maybe you need to ask both the town board and the planning board to put conditions of approval that include lateral restrictions to prevent the lattice, as you referred to it, Tim, of people building off of water lines one from the next, or sewer lines, and then extending it.
makes sense.
So Bob, I don't know if I really answered your question or not. I feel like I introduced more questions.
Well, that's okay. I think at least we have a starting point. Can I follow up with you on some of this to work on putting a little
Oh,
something
sure.
plan together to present to the town board or maybe the ordinance committee first to
Yeah.
get feedback? So
Either
that we can start moving ahead with something.
Either way, you know, and maybe, I don't know if the ag committee would be interested in doing some sort of presentation to the town board directly during one of their meetings to share with the town board the concerns that the ag committee has about the continued creep and that we need to be doing some additional steps, taking some additional steps. That may be helpful. They very well may be very interested to hear directly from the ag committee if the ag committee want to do some sort of presentation and we could include this type of stuff.
Okay. But I think we have to have a little bit better plan
Sure.
first. So,
Yep, absolutely.
okay. Well, I'll follow up with you, Doug, then on maybe setting up a time when we can look over some of that together.
Sure. Yeah, happy to do it. There's so many other things that, you know, as Sarah was saying, I'm even just mind thinking here a little bit. You know, we have an affordable housing and transportation project team. And again, maybe if there's something relative to this area that there's an outcome that also supports those types of efforts, you know, maybe that does help with that argument that it's not just subsidizing agriculture, it's helping to elevate our whole community as an entity, whether it's through the agriculture or the social aspects or the quality of life that we enjoy. Because really, the open space that Sarah's talking about, that's a fundamental component of the quality of life that we all enjoy, whether it's you live in a housing development or whether or not you live on a farm. It's even if you live in a housing development, it's the ability to take a ride down the road on a winter day and look across the fields at the snow and see the deer out in the field and the sun setting, and then take a ride down to the lake. That's all part of our overall quality of life, right? So
This past weekend, there were more snowmobilers out on the snowmobile trails all across these ag properties. You know, that would be all gone if this was developed. So interesting that you know, you're considering the overall value to the community of being able to get out to benefit from the views of farmland.
What was it when the town did a survey and a very large percentage of the people thought that preserving farmland was important? So we need to find these people and get them just to get out their checkbooks and buy some of it.
Yeah, and you know, when we did that survey, that was part of the concept mapping exercise that we did that really resulted in the creation of our Canandaigua Local Development Corporation, which is a joint LLC or LDC, I'm sorry, Limited Development Corporation, that is a partnership between the town of Canandaigua, the city of Canandaigua, and the Chamber of Commerce. And when we did that concept mapping exercise, the overwhelming majority of the respondents talked about the importance, and it was a very high percentage, talking about the importance of agriculture to the community. And it wasn't just town residents. When we looked at the sub details, it was also the city residents talked about the importance of agriculture to our community and the Canandaigua community. And you know, Bob, just saying that out loud, that is an area that is, there are 6 strategic initiatives that our local development corporation has. One of which is the continued foster, promotion and support of our agriculture community and what that means. And so the LDC has recently been working on a craft beverage trail associated with that. But when we get into actual agriculture, extinguishment of development rights, what our LDC to this point has said is, Canandaigua town, you do such a great job with that. You're one of the leaders in the state of New York in doing that. We'll let you handle that. But maybe we need to go back and have that conversation with the LDC and explore what other opportunities there are for the LDC to help support us in this initiative.
You know, you just made me think of something. You know, one thing that one of the reasons people cash out is they don't want to farm anymore. Maybe the LDC could help find people who want to farm and somehow make the connection between the sellers and the buyers and help somehow. I know a lot of the reasons people don't get into farming is they can't afford to buy the land, but maybe there's an option. Maybe there's an option in there.
Well, you're spot on, Sarah. I mean, we have a whole team working right now on affordable housing, and I know that there's been discussion about a desire to have home ownership affordable housing, and that's hard to do because let's say you do build an affordable housing project, right? If there's no regulations, the person that owns it is going to sell it for market value. They're going to cash out, they're going to make a fortune, and then it's going to become market. It's no longer going to become affordable housing, right? Maybe we need to have an affordable farming aspect. Plant that seed with you. What if there was some sort of component, whether it's an authority or something with our LDC that basically helps to keep a certain percentage of the farmland as affordable to future generations? There's any different mechanisms that we could look at with that, but I don't know of anybody doing that, but that's like a crazy out of the box thinking type thing. So
Well, I'm glad you had it. It kind of borders on the property rights issue, I guess. I don't know how you'd fund it.
right.
I'm sorry I said that in a negative way. I didn't mean it that way, but
No, that's the issue. That's the issue, to be honest with you, that we're having with affordable housing. But there are programs, right, for new farmers. And maybe that is an easy way for us to get started, building off of what Sarah's saying, and maybe the LDC could help with that. I know that there's programs that exist for essentially brand new farmers that are interested in getting involved and getting in the agriculture. And if maybe we're able to recruit to understand those programs more and maybe even get some grant dollars through our LDC that our LDC could then help allocate to folks that would like to purchase land in the town of Canandaigua for farming brand new farmers, that might be another avenue.
I am aware that there are veterans programs available for veterans
Yes.
to go ahead and get into farming in some capacity or another. I don't know how much, that would be supported, but you take a look at the size of farms here in upstate New York compared to, other places in the country. I think that our farms are relatively small and you can't really cut up the farms. I mean, one of the problems, Bob, you could probably talk about this is, getting land to lease. There seems to be a lot of competition for that. And, what do you think about that?
As far as the competition,
Yeah, to be able to have enough land, if you brought in more, farmers to be able to farm, the land, and, your land was taken up by those farmers to be able to go ahead and do that. Does that work for you? I mean, it's kind of.
well, I think you'd be
what
looking
does.
at it as land that was going to be leaving production or something, or at risk of leaving. That's why you'd be bringing someone in to buy it. So I wouldn't see it as adding additional farmers. Probably it'd be a situation of someone retiring and looking for someone to take that land over.
Part of the PDR program is a succession plan, I believe.
It is. It absolutely is. One of the things though, Tim, you just, you were touching on, I was referencing the different avenues earlier that we could explore. The town of Canandaigua has what's called an open space fund, and the town board pretty much annually now contributes money to that open space fund we've used it in the past, that fund, to help with the PDR, the extinguishment of the development rights. It can be used for any number of things. In the scenario that you just described, Tim, it can be used for that. The town of Canandaigua has the ability to purchase land, retain title to the land, open space fund, and then lease that land out for agriculture purposes if they so choose. So in the scenario that you just explained, if you have, and that Bob was explaining, if you have somebody that maybe might be coming out, that maybe they're going to retire and there's no succession planning there, maybe we need to at least develop a program that, hey, the town of Canandaigua also considers looking at the fee title to those parcels, because once the town owns it, right? And then leasing that land out to the farming community if it's maybe in this area. And again, maybe that's another simple thing. Maybe that's a step one, baby step type thing, where we could say, hey, at least if a parcel comes up in this area, town, please at least consider looking at the acquisition of it and then leasing it back out for agriculture purposes. That might be another baby step thing.
Okay. Interesting.
And we do have one example of that. The town owns land on Buffalo Street Extension that is leased out for farming purposes.
Because I know the town owns that land, does that have to the town could sell it, or what is I know it's always been leased for farming, but what are the rules with that land?
So when it's used, when the open space reserve fund is used to acquire land, it has very specific uses and really kind of binds what the future could look like for that. So it's not impossible for the town to sell that land, but it becomes very difficult because that reserve fund really spells out the specific requirements of what can be done with the money and then subsequently the land. So that land being purchased for open space protection, but agriculture operation is, in this particular case, it's vacant land, obviously, that's being farmed. That is still very much part of the open space protection. The challenge that we run into is there's also a desire, I think, to allow public access to as much of the town land as possible, right? And so sometimes you get into a situation where you might not want to have public access in the middle of a farm field, right? That just may not work. And so it's about finding parcels where that balance actually works.
Well, the UK has open farmland for anybody that wants to walk through it. I don't know if that's anything that would be available for land that the town owns or not, to be able to put that type of path through there or not. There's some more value back to the community.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. That's interesting, Tim. And there are other parcels that the town owns that, whether or not they could be farmed, maybe it's something to explore. Maybe that's something, again, future for the Ag Committee to look at, is the town-owned parcels and to see whether or not there's any opportunity to lease any of that land for farming operation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we've had a lot of good discussion and a lot of good ideas. So
Bringing it back to the red circle, though, I think that, keeping it focused in that area and discussing, what the town ordinance committee would accept as far as restricting the lateral extension of water and sewer, would be a really good place to start.
Yeah.
And Bob, I'm happy to work with you on that, and we can put something together.
We'll put something together and I'll bring it back to the committee, and then we can decide who next best to go to with that. All right.
Sounds great.
Well, those of us that didn't join, or those that didn't join tonight, have missed out on lots of good discussion.
Well, the good news is we did record it, and I know that Kim will send the minutes out and stuff, and I think the town board's included in that. Maybe we just put a little note in there that we had a interesting conversation relative to this, and we just asked the town board members to watch this video. Grab a bag of popcorn and watch the video for an hour, right? So.
That'd be great.
All right. Anything else?
I just had one point, and this is a thanks to Kim. You guys might notice that on the agenda, there's gonna be maybe a standing item at the bottom that says strategic goals. On a lot of our boards and committees, we've started to enter on the agenda the goals from the 2022 priority goals from the comp plan that were decided last year. If they pertain to the groups, we've added them on the agenda as just kind of a constant reminder. This is what the town board decided was a priority for this year, and it has something to do with your own group. So I know that Kim, doesn't the ECB do this too?
Yes, they have them on their agenda as well. I think the CIC does too.
Yeah, so it was just kind of a nice way to reiterate the 2022 priorities, which everything we talked about tonight has to do with that. But it's a good way to keep everybody remembering what we're supposed to be working on. So she put that on there for you guys just to be a little tickle to remember.
Definitely pay attention to that. Thank you.
All right, well, if nothing else, I move that we adjourn.
I second it.
All right, thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Have a good week.
Take care.
Good to see everybody. Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.